So welcome. This is Dr. Sam Sunshine, and today I have a very special guest. This is Michelle Dinsdale. She's a local health coach here in South Orange County, and today's topic is going to be on visceral fat. So it's a topic that I don't think many people really know what visceral fat is and how it's super important in health. So Michelle, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
It's really,
you.
really
It's
nice.
great to be here.
And again, this is really for a talk that anybody could listen to who wants to learn more about being healthy. Michelle, tell us a little bit about your background as a health coach, how long you've been a health coach, and what kind of inspired you to go into health coaching.
So health coaching is a relatively new career. I've been doing it for 4 years. I think we're starting to see more and more health coaches actually come out. And basically our role is to support doctors in helping their patients get from being sick to being well and taking the overwhelm away and helping people actually implement the steps that it needs to take to be able to get healthy.
Okay, excellent. So again, that's kind of what I see as roles of doctors, and health coaches are becoming more and more instrumental in helping doctors do their job because they oftentimes don't have time to coach, educate, and motivate patients. So again, let me share my screen and we're going to get started. I think it's
Yeah.
That's it.
That's
okay.
it.
So we'll kind of go in and out of the talk here. This will be a slide presentation. And I'm going to talk first, and then Michelle's going to basically talk afterwards. And then I'm going to kind of ping her with some questions as we go along. So hold tight. But again, it's visceral fat. What is it? And should we be concerned about it? So when we talk about visceral fat, the first question is, what is visceral fat? And we'll talk about that. How does visceral fat develop? How can we measure visceral fat? What are the health risks of having too much visceral fat? And then how can we get rid of visceral fat? So that's kind of the outline of today's presentation. So when we talk about visceral fat, it's really this fat that kind of surrounds our abdominal contents. When we talk about fat in our body, there's two types. There's subcutaneous, and this is, again, fat that everybody has. It's underneath the skin, and we can see it for the most part. We can feel it. And then there's visceral fat, which we can't see, and it's very hard to measure. So sometimes we don't know how much we have. Again, subcutaneous fat located beneath our skin, and the visceral fat is located around our abdominal organs, kind of like the picture on the right there. So how does it develop? So visceral fat accumulates over time. We're not necessarily born with much visceral fat. The hormone insulin, which is considered a storage hormone, plays an integral role in developing and accumulating visceral fat. And the longer, more often insulin levels are high, the more visceral fat that accumulates. So it tells our body to store fat. And this picture on the right shows increased energy intake. This is something Michelle will talk more about. And decreased energy expenditure leads to this positive energy balance. And as a result, you get lipid or fat overload or overflow that then kind of creeps into these organs like the liver, the heart, muscle, kidney, and pancreas. And as you'll learn, this is not good. There are other hormones that also play a role in addition to insulin. That's cortisol, also our diet and fructose intake, and then reproductive hormones also play a key role in regulating visceral fat. We won't talk so much about that, but it is important to know that this visceral fat is like a living organ. It secretes pro-inflammatory cytokines. It really is the basis for the development of inflammation within our body. And that is not something we want. So when we talk about visceral fat in aging, again, this is not a picture of a group of 20-year-olds, but most people would see this and go, yeah, these are older men. And we do know that visceral fat increases in men after their 30s and in women after they enter menopause. And high visceral fat levels are more common in men than women, and they tend to be higher as we age. So how do we measure visceral fat? I'm going to show several ways that we can measure this. And so most people say, well, gosh, yeah, how do I know? A crude way is measuring your waist size, and that's taking out a tape measure at the level of your belly button and seeing what your circumference is around your abdomen, basically, at the level of your belly button. If it's greater than 35 inches in women and greater than 40 inches in men, you're increased risk for having health issues. And we'll talk more about that. If you're of Asian descent, the number is 31.5 inches and 35.5 inches in women and men, respectively. So that's a crude way of measuring visceral fat. Another way of measuring visceral fat is a waist to hip ratio, where you measure your waist at the level of belly button, and then you measure your hips at the widest part of your hips. And this graph on the right gives you a little bit of an idea. If you're a female and you're less than 0.8 or a male less than 0.95, that's healthy. But if you're above 0.85 or above 1 in women and men, respectively, that's high risk. So that's another way that's measured. And then a third of 4 ways that you can measure it is this waist to height ratio. And this has been found to maybe be more accurate than measuring just waist to or hip to waist ratio or just waist circumference alone. And it's particularly useful in type 1 diabetics. Again, like I said, it's considered more reliable than the hip to weight ratio. Waist to hip ratio, and ideal is less than 50. And this graph on the right kind of depicts that. You want to be in the green is healthy, yellow is borderline, and red is unhealthy. So amazing we can give this whole talk on just one type of fat in our body. But again, this is not something I think the average person knows much about. And that's why Michelle and I decided, hey, let's talk about this because it's something you can do something about. Another tool that we have in our office, we've had for a few years now, is a medical body composition analyzer. And this is a scale, it's bioelectrical impedance where you step on barefoot, and it measures multiple things, but basically your skeletal muscle mass, or your lean body mass, and also your fat mass. And it can measure your visceral fat level, and it can come as level 1 to 4 is subcutaneous fat. Level 5 to 8 is a balanced type fat, and that's somebody who has normal visceral fat. And then you have 9 to 10, which is borderline, 11 to 15, type 1 visceral fat, and 16 to 20. So the higher you go, it's an indication of higher levels of visceral fat. And then you also have visceral fat area that it measures. The optimal range is 50 to 100 in men and 40 to 80 in women. And this is just a printout. This is a blank printout of an Acunic form or report that you can get. And if you have really good eyesight, the fourth one down is this abdominal obesity category that looks at your waist to hip ratio, and then also looks at your visceral fat level and your visceral fat area. So there's a way that we can monitor and track visceral fat levels over time. And this is where it becomes really fun because you can see your progress. And this is a great tool, and we have it in our office. So, and it doesn't cost our members anything. So take advantage of it. So I'm going to finish up talking about some complications of visceral fat, and then I'm going to let Michelle take over and talk about ways we can reduce the visceral fat. So as I'm going to tell you next, having visceral fat is not something to take lightly. So the first thing is, if you look at this graph on the right, it looks like things are pretty normal with these different colored lines until you get above 30 centimeters squared. And this is visceral fat area. You start to see an increase in all these different risks of high blood pressure, high triglycerides, high cholesterol, and metabolic syndrome markers. So these are all bad things. So one of the risks with carrying too much visceral fat is heart attack and heart disease, which is a leading cause of death in men and women worldwide. Type 2 diabetes. This is one of those diseases we have not been able to control over the last 30 years. Stroke. This is not getting enough blood to your brain. It's like a heart attack of the brain. Breast cancer. Certainly a woman's greatest fear is developing breast cancer. Having a high visceral fat level increases that risk. Same with colon cancer. Again, the third leading cause of cancer-related death in men and women. And then cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease. Again, a big fear, especially if you have a family member who's got Alzheimer's, or you have several family members, grandparents who have Alzheimer's. You know, one of the things that's associated with your increased risk is having high visceral fat levels. And then depression. And I just decided to include this one article that was recently published. It's depressive symptoms are associated with visceral fat adiposity in a community-based sample of middle-aged men and women. So again, depression and visceral fat are related. So before I turn this over, I'm going to kind of say, you know, can we reduce visceral fat? Can we go from having a big belly to a skinnier belly? Or is it inevitable? Are we just predetermined to pre-programmed to develop visceral fat? And can you reverse visceral fat level? And is there a pill I can take? Can I simply just take a pill and reverse visceral fat accumulation? Well, that's the society we live in. And I'd like to show this slide, but there's two windows you can go up to. One is toxic pills and surgery, and the other one is lifestyle changes. Most of people in our society want the quick fix. They want to be able to stand in line and get that pill or that procedure. And certainly people with morbid obesity, having bypass surgery or bariatric surgery, as you call it, can be helpful for people who just cannot make changes in the lifestyle. But again, we're more about lifestyle changes. And so I'm going to turn the mic over to Michelle, and she's going to give you some really good advice on, you know, what she does as a health coach and helping patients, and what you can do to start to reverse visceral fat accumulation. And then at the end, we'll give you information about how you can contact Michelle for maybe hiring her as a coach, because we know working with a coach, people are much more successful. Again, a recent article I read this morning from the Family Medicine Journal talked about working with a health coach in a doctor's office was associated with much higher success rates of fat loss over 2 years than doing it the usual way, which is having a doctor tell you to go out and exercise more and eat less. So Michelle, again, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
You've been so
for having
patient
me.
as I've been trying to explain all this and priming you.
That's awesome.
All right, so.
All right, so there are several things we can do when someone actually approaches a health coach and they've been told by their doctor that they need to reduce their visceral fats. There's a spectrum that we work with called the 7 Essentials of Health. And I think before we even delve into those 7 essentials, one of the first things we do in health coaching is actually address the mind of the patient, because we've discovered that if the mindset isn't right from the get-go, the success rate is probably not as high. So one of the first things we do is we look at the motivation of the client. What is your motivation to lose your fat? We have discovered that when it's a deep-rooted motivation, something where I'll share with you what mine is. I am so desperate not to be in a nursing home when I'm older so that my children are forced to look after me. And so my motivation is to make all the good choices I can on an everyday basis. Some clients will approach me and tell me they want to look good in a bikini. That's a great motivation, but my experience is that people will normally fall off track if that's their motivation. The deep-rooted motivation seems to do better. So one of the first things in health coaching is we address, what is your mindset? Are you ready for this? Are you ready to put in the work? Are you ready? Is your motivation high enough? So we know that eating whole foods is probably one of the most important things you can do. Whole foods means eating foods that are close to their natural state. So I'll give you an example. A roasted sweet potato is so much better than a canned sweet potato that is filled with corn syrup. Eating sprouted wheat is probably a lot better than eating processed wheat. So we try and incorporate those foods and find out what foods work for each client. What can you incorporate into your lifestyle? We also know that eating whole foods regulates hormones, regulates the appetites, it lowers inflammation, and it helps digestion and also regulates the stress hormones. Sugar is highly inflammatory when it comes to visceral fat, and it really drives high levels of insulin. So that leads to high levels of visceral fat as well, and it's so addictive. So one of the first things I try and do is help clients break sugar addiction. It's really difficult to do, but as average Americans, we're eating between 22 to 36 teaspoons of sugar every single day. And some of those are in hidden foods. We're not really even aware of what we're eating. And then it's really important to find out what is the client's relationship with food. Women typically tend to eat their emotions. We associate food with absolutely everything, and so we address that as well. The next most important thing to address is stress. We know that stress and high levels of it actually raise cortisol, and together with high sugar levels, it's a key player in storing belly fat. So we work on actually reducing your stress levels by something called stress perception. I think it's very overwhelming when we tell somebody that they need to manage their stress, because it's such a vague word. How do you manage stress? So I work with clients to try and alter the way that they perceive stress. If we can look at a situation and not see it as detrimental, or we tend to overthink situations so much. If we can look at a situation in a more positive light, we really do regulate our cortisol levels a lot more. We don't get our blood pressure up as high, and we just do so much better. So we work on a lot of meditation. We try and do things that get people into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is a calming system. And we really devote a lot of time to that. Okay, the next one. So sleep is so important. You could be eating well, exercising, but if you're not sleeping well, you're probably going to have higher cortisol levels as well. And your growth hormone is not going to be as elevated as you need to. We have found that there was a study in the Journal of Sleep, and it actually showed that people who slept for less than 5 hours actually gain more belly fat than people who slept for more than 6 hours.
Great point.
Yeah. So in health coaching, we work so intensively on forming a sleep hygiene protocol. You know, as mothers, we used to do that with our children. We would have that hour before bed where we were feeding them, we were bathing them, we were reading to them. And by the time we put them down to sleep, they were ready for it. And I think we kind of lose the plot as we become adults because we're so stressed. We're on the computer, we're drinking alcohol, we're doing all these things that raise our cortisol levels and actually don't predispose us to a great night of sleep. So in health coaching, we actually put together a protocol. It's customized to each client. But we generally advise things like don't drink alcohol, have your last meal a couple of hours before bedtime, use blue blocking glasses if you have to be on devices, you know, do some stretching, have a bath, so that by the time you get to sleep time, you're really ready for it and you're ready for a good night's sleep. The next one I love, and it's fun. We underestimate having fun so much in our lives, and it was quite interesting. There's a research study done by the Scripps Institute that actually discovered that high levels of serotonin, which we produce when we're actually having fun and doing fun things, activates a receptor in the intestinal cells and intestines, and it actually turns fat into energy. So it's interesting when I ask adults what they do for fun. There's always a bit of a silence because we have to think about it. If you ask a child, they'll tell you instantaneously they have fun at sports, they have fun at the park. But for adults, we have to sit back because we've really lost the ability to know what fun is, and we don't delve into it as much. So as a health coach, we try and discover that with each client, discover what brings them joy. For some, it might be doing a craft, it might be doing a sport. We do know that people who have fun and have a more positive outlook on life tend to have lower levels of belly fat. Childhood trauma. So there was a study in the Journal of Endocrinology, and it showed that the weight-regulating hormones were implicated in people who have experienced childhood trauma. It also concluded that people who've dealt with childhood adversity have a higher risk of developing excess body fat and belly fat because it puts a stress on the endocrine system and the hormones responsible for controlling body fat. Now, we might associate childhood trauma as someone who's been abused, but actually, it comes down to programming as well. Things your parents have said to you, even if their intentions were good, but have left a lasting imprint. An example might be a woman who's been told by her mother that she needs to lose weight constantly, that she doesn't look good in clothes. That really impacts our ability to put into practice all these lifestyle changes if we have pre-programmed ideals. And so part of health coaching is actually delving into that territory and discovering if they are there, if they're prominent, if they're going to make a difference. Sometimes it's necessary to move out of our scope of practice and actually refer to a therapist who might be able to help us. But my experience has been that those programming gestures that have been sort of, put into us as children really do have a difference in the outcome, whether you're going to lose body fat or not. And there's spirituality and community. Spirituality isn't necessarily talking about whether you believe in a religion, but it is assuming that it is really important to believe that there is a higher power and a sense of purpose in our lives. If we are not getting out of bed every morning with a sense of purpose, it becomes really hard to make good choices in your everyday life. If we have meaning in our lives and we're surrounded by community where we can actually learn to serve, we're surrounded by friends, by family, we feel like we're loved, we are able to reach out to people to get help and to give help, we tend to make such better choices. And it's interesting that when we have good spirituality and community, we have lower levels of body fat as well. That comes with the territory.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is amazing. So that, childhood traumas is one of the things we do learn about, but it's not something that I ask about a lot.
Yeah.
Even though I know it's important.
And it's interesting because it normally comes up in conversation. You'll find that people have very set ways of thinking about something, especially if they're self-sabotaging, which comes up quite a bit. And when you start doing a little bit more, prodding, it really comes to light that your parent might have said something. And they might have said it in a way that they thought was helping you, but you've interpreted it in a different way. And it's become this roadblock to actually getting either better in your health or to losing weight. So it's actually become quite a big obstacle to most people.
And they say that we develop about 90% of our personality by age 6.
That's right. So everything before then. And actually, as parents, it makes a lot of sense to really motivate and say, love your children as much as you can. Really think about what you're saying in the way that they might interpret it, because it does make a difference in the way forward. And I'm working with, women and men who are 50 plus, and those programming issues are still with them.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So they really have an implication.
And they're not aware, and most people aren't even aware of it.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, I think I'm going to ask you, do we have another? I think I'm going to ask you some.
Sure. Oh, sorry, there's one more. Yeah, so this is
yeah.
a really important one. We know that exercise is probably one of the most important things you can do if you're trying to lose belly fat. I try and get clients to move for 30 minutes, maybe every day. One of the biggest stumbling blocks I find with clients is it's an all or nothing approach. So when I tell someone that they need to exercise, my next session with them, I've seen the clients actually sign up for a marathon by the end of the next month. It's a little bit too much. I'm more for let's keep the process underwhelming. If we can find movement that you love, you're more than likely going to stay with that movement. For me, and I know for you, that might be running, cycling, swimming. For somebody else, when you tell them to run, their cortisol levels raise. And that's not a good thing for them. They might enjoy Pilates or yoga more. But ideally, we want to be incorporating a lot of different exercise modalities, a little bit of stretching, a little bit of cardio, a little bit of yoga, Pilates. Some exercise is going to move you into the parasympathetic system, like running, where it's fight or flight. But we want to move people back into the parasympathetic nervous system as well. So that's Pilates, yoga, breathing. Anything that gets the heart pumping, anything that gets you feeling good, where we're releasing dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, is really important. So people who are exercising regularly, we are going to see a big improvement in the reduction of excess belly fat.
Yeah, totally directly related, exercise. And I think you and I really think a lot along the same lines. It's consistency, carves canyons. It's not about signing up for a marathon. They're trying to do a little bit every day.
Yep.
And then also trying to get into nature, just being outside, going to a park, walking in the foothills here. It's beautiful. We have beautiful mountains. Also helps to reduce that sympathetic tone or kick in the parasympathetic tone. So I'm going to peg you with some questions here.
Okay.
So as a health coach, what are the signs you pick up on that someone is carrying excess visceral fat?
Okay, so for women, I can normally tell that they're carrying a lot of weight around their abdomen. Their arms and their legs might be slimmer, but they definitely don't have a defined waist, and we just typically see most of the weight in their belly. For men, it's that noticeable pot belly or beer belly. It's pretty solid. So that's a good giveaway right there.
Yeah, and now with the AccuNick machine, it makes it easy. We can actually
they're really accurate.
Get a little bit more accuracy. Yeah. And then what are the risks? We kind of talked about these high levels of visceral fat. that you
Mhm.
encounter? What are some of the things that you've encountered in your clients?
Some of my clients, so most of my clients who've arrived, and most of my clients have had excess belly fat. We've seen women with breast cancer, heart disease, insulin resistance is a very big one. And but it also sets us up, as you said, for Alzheimer's, dementia, cognitive decline down the line. So we need to address it as quickly as possible before it actually gets to that stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So insulin resistance that Michelle just mentioned is really the stepping stone to type 2 diabetes. And the way we measure that is we measure fasting blood sugar or glucose and fasting insulin,
So, yeah.
and we multiply those together with a coefficient, and it gives us a number. So that's how we look at insulin resistance. And again, it's that high level of insulin that turns on, storage of fat, and it is the precursor to inflammation, autoimmune conditions, the whole host
The whole
of
gist, yeah.
bad things
Okay.
that can happen to us, to our health. And that's the whole part of, can we age and not have health issues? I really think this is a big part of it, is keeping our visceral fat low. So what steps do you take to help a client reduce visceral fat?
So as I said in the beginning, and going back to what I said, it's mindset first. Really, we
Mhm.
want to find the motivation. Why is it so important for you to lose this body fat and to get healthy? And then we work, as I said, on the 7 essentials of health. And we move through each modality just depending on each person. Some people move through each modality pretty effortlessly. Some we find, a few obstacles with, but generally this is a pretty good sort of foundation just to get people through to living a healthier life and dropping that excess weight.
That's great. And again, I think the role of the health coach is going to become bigger and bigger, almost blossoming in the years to come. Okay. And then my last question, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. And I got to make sure people know how to get a hold of you. So we'll talk about that.
Thanks.
But what are some of the challenges some clients will encounter during this process?
So a few of the things I see, as I think I've mentioned, self-sabotage is a big one. We need to get through, why are you doing this? What is the programming you have? And helping people over those obstacles. Actually, my passion is getting people to become the best potential of themselves. And I think as a coach, when you invest that kind of passion and that, sort of giving them the idea that you believe in them more than they believe themselves, we accomplish so much. I've just seen people break these barriers and just really, there's such a great transformation at the end of the day. We just have to get people past what they think they are and
Mhm.
to what they can be. And I believe that every single person is meant to just live a long, happy, healthy life. And the reasons why we're sabotaging ourselves every single day. So I love my job so much because I find that people, every single client I've worked with is so amazing. They bring so much to the table. There's so much. I just love people for investing in their health and trying to become the best potential that they can be. Because honestly, when you are at your best health, you can do anything. You have the vitality to, grow old with your children, run with your grandchildren. You can go on holiday, walking and limping and using a walker down the line, hopefully. And we each have that potential to be the best that we can be. And I honestly believe that the human body was not made, to regress to a point where we're actually not even moving. I believe that there's so much we can do to move into old age healthier, with more vitality and just feeling good. I'd love people to feel amazing at the end of the day.
Well, I certainly feel your enthusiasm, Michelle. So again, I know you're great at what you do. I know you have some references you wanted to share. So for some people who want to take a look at this.
Yeah, those are some really good clinical studies. Dr. Mark Hyman's fantastic. He always has so much information, as you do, on these topics, and from a functional approach as well, which is what I appreciate.
So let us know, how can someone get a hold of you?
You can go to my website. It's michelledinsdale.com, or you can email me at info@michelledinsdale, that's one word.com. And I'll
Okay.
happily get back to you soon.
So again, Michelle, Michelle, and Dinsdale, Dinsdale, Dinsdale.com. So again, thank you for listening. Again, it was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much. It's always
And
so
it's the
much
second
fun
time we've
speaking
done
with
this,
you.
and so I'm sure we'll have you back. We'll come up with another topic. And again, this is more education for the general population, for people who want to learn about these health topics. So again, thank you for listening. Appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to see what we have to say. And Now I got to figure out how to get back into,
Here
there we
are.
go. There we are. So again, thank you for joining us. And it was a pleasure.